Our first conversation, the Debt Management Office is planning to raise up to 1.2 trillion naira in debt through reissuance of federal government bonds, even as it spent 1.195 trillion naira on paying interest on the FGN bonds in the first 6 months of this year. Data from the Debt Management Office shows that Nigeria's total debt stood at $113.4 billion as of June 30th. In August, President Bola Tinubu has declared that Nigeria will no longer sustain an economic philosophy that ensures the wastage of 90% of its revenue on external debt service. Meanwhile, the Senator talked about a comprehensive strategy. Let's talk now on the details with Emmanuel Onasami, lead partner at Cardinal Professional Services, joining me right here in the studio. Great to have you. Good morning.
Yeah, good morning, laddie. Thank you for having me today.
Yeah, so I get it. You know, debt is important. You know, sometimes businesses, especially countries, will need debt to fund, you know, spending most of the time. So, you know, debt in itself is not a bad thing. But where it becomes a problem is when you have revenue issues, I believe. And looking at Nigeria now, how do we avoid using 90% of revenue to fund, you know, our deficits? That's through debt.
Okay, thank you very much, laddie. Like you just alluded to, you know, debt in itself is not a bad thing. Even the best of economies in the world, you know, they have significant debt. You know, they are running the economy. Debt is an instrument that is expected to be used by the government to stimulate the economy. You know, when you do it in that manner, you are doing it sustainably. You know, you get to a point where you begin to use debt to service debt, or debt to service recurring expenses, and not infrastructural development that will stimulate the economy. That's where the situation becomes problematic. You know, and there have been a lot of ideas. Oh, Nigeria's debt situation is not bad yet. We have not hit our 40% debt to GDP ratio. But why that conversation is true, and I alluded to the fact that Nigeria is still on the path to sustainable debt, you know, structure. But the conversation is how have we used the debt we have received in the past? You know, have we used it for the purpose of economic growth? You know, Reinhardt and Rogoff in 2010, in their publication, they confirmed that, look, the relationship between debt and economic growth or sustainability is non-linear. You know, when your debt portfolio is low and you take more debt, yes, it's expected to stimulate the economy if you put it in the right aspect of the economy. But when you begin to hit higher level of debt, you know, in a manner that is not stimulating the economy, then it becomes problematic. You know, the best way to appreciate the Nigerian situation, laddie, is to kind of, yes, they said sovereign debt is a bit different from personal debt, but look at yourself. You obtain a debt and all your salaries you use to pay debt. You know, what kind of misery will be going on? You know, that's kind of misery level, you know, that in quotes Nigerians are experiencing because the government have not been able to use debt in a manner that stimulates the economy. Yeah, we have some earmarked debt, like the Chinese debt, you know, based on the DMO statistic that are earmarked to some particular projects. But significant of the debt that we have taken in the past have not been used in a productive manner.
Right, and I do hope that, you know, individuals don't have this kind of problem, because I can imagine, you know, spending 90%
of your income you'll be in misery.
Servicing debt. Even though I know these loan apps, you know, are all over the place right now, and Nigerians are having to deal, you know, with so much debt there. But what comprehensive strategy can solve this, you know, debt issue, so that we don't, you know, get that famous kiss of debt on the forehead?
Yeah, so I think the first thing is responsible governance. You know, our government needs to become responsible. And when I mean responsible, we need to be sincere about our economic policy direction and what we want to do for the people. And when I say the people now, the masses. You know, because when you take debt for the purpose of just servicing some personal interest, that is not equal to responsible governance. You know, we need to first be sincere with ourselves as a people and say, government, we want to do this for our people. And secondly, I think Nigeria also needs to toe the direction of other countries that have responded to the situation of the fact that global economy and global income globally is shrinking. and they are looking at their, equity base as a nation, their asset base as a nation for the purpose of opening up, unlocking liquidity. The problem with governance is liquidity. If you can guarantee liquidity, you will be fine. But over the time, we are so fixated on oil revenue as our whole solitary source of income, and maybe where there is no oil revenue, we run to debt and say, hey, so party, come and give me debt, public, come and give me debt. But we need to be more creative. And that's where the economic team needs to have a roundtable, have a sit down and say, how can we unlock liquidity from our balance sheet as a nation? Look at some assets that Nigeria have. Look at the case of the Nigerian refinery that have been moribund. That is a significant level of assets. Based on the publication made by the Ministry of Finance Incorporated, we have on paper that Nigeria has over 180 trillion worth of dead assets. That is a potential liquidity that can be unlocked if there are deliberate strategic action to unlock those assets. And bulk of those assets are in the real estate. Some of them are, in equity.
You see most of those empty buildings in Ikoyi.
Do you understand? Right. Those assets can be strategically unlocked for the purpose of enhancing government liquidity. A classic example is the example of the Saudi Aramco. Look at the way the government of Saudi Arabia is unlocking liquidity through the equity of that entity, and more thinking in that direction needs to be happening at the, at the boardroom where they are discussing this issue of debt. Going the route of increasing our debt year on year is no longer sustainable, because what it means is that government will not have the fund to put into economy to stimulate it. So we need to shift our focus and say, while we are still asking oil revenue to go up, can we possibly unlock liquidity with our balance sheet? India has done something like that successfully. I'm also aware that Brazil has done something like that successfully. Why are we not looking in that direction?
Right, and definitely the government needs lots of revenue right now. And as you did mention, that's be creative, at this time to unlock, most of those revenues. But looking at the current revenue, is there a way that the government can manage the current revenue, maybe by cutting its coat to its size and, somehow getting things done even with our current revenue? Because we did hear there at Labour talking about, watching how the government is going to cut cost of governance. How are you seeing that?
Yeah, so sadly, one of the things that aggravated, our debt position is the devaluation of the Naira. Sadly, when Naira became poorer, that means your obligation also was blown up, as a matter of that. So I'm glad that before, you invited me in, you had that conversation from the Labour, trying to hold government accountable on cost-cutting measures. Because the truth is, we cannot say we are not earning enough and we are not looking inward to possibly reduce the cost of governance that is already bloated. You still see some special advisors to governors still running around, with a double-digit number of vehicles, in their patrol, and they are all burning fuels. At that exorbitant rate, that is not sustainable. So we need to reflect and say, at this moment, we need to run a shrewd economy that will unlock opportunity for our people.
And we did see, Sarah also, talking about most of his senators that are former governors.
Also still
shouldn't be collecting salaries as senators.
Because they are still getting their governor's pension.
Right.
And then some form
Can we afford that, really, at this point?
So we seem to deceive ourselves as a nation like we've arrived. But we are on the way there. And as such, when you are growing a business or you are growing an entity, you don't behave as if you're already a matured business. Just like a private business will look inward and say, I'm growing an entity, there are some things that I can't afford, I have to be shrewd in a manner. Same way, we're on a journey to prosperity as a nation. So you cannot be comparing a senator in Nigeria with a senator elsewhere. In fact, the senators in Nigeria are maybe one of the most, that comfortable or prosperous,
quite rich,
rich, senators across the world for a nation that is yet to feed its people successfully.
All right, let's look at this. This is a brand new government, right now. How can they realistically, go about their spending without taking on, more debt, going forward?
Yeah. So, like I was saying, apparently there are some. If you look at that portfolio of debt assets, There are some that you know that they are no longer viable. You have to dispose them. You know, the truth is that privatization or disposal of government asset is not in entirety bad. You know, if you know or you've recognized as a government that you cannot manage or participate in this, you dispose them. Some of them, out of that 180 trillion worth of assets, you convert them into some concessionary arrangement where government has some form of participation. You know, just like the case of Saudi Aramco I mentioned, you know, equity participation. From there, you unlock liquidity into governance, you know. And I also believe strongly that, you know, there's a lot of things going on in the international politics space. And if people in charge of our international policy are pretty, you know, interested in using the opportunity going on in the international politics space for the benefit of Nigerians, I think we can renegotiate some of our debts. You know, we can also get some other player that wants to have Nigeria on their side to also refinance some of our debts. You know, these are some of the creative things that you need to look holistically, not just from one angle and say, oh, let's just go for the next debt. There are some things that needs to be going on the table for the purpose of making sure that, no, there is liquid cash to run governance. Because if government do not stimulate the economy, it will go worse. The experience of Nigeria will grow worse, and that will not be good for the nation.
All right, and definitely the macro issues are still there with rising inflation, and we still have the issue of currency devaluation at this time. And we have a new CBN governor. What would you say should be the point of action, you know, going forward, you know, looking at, you know, the CBN leadership right now? Okay,
for me, I think in the past, you know, CBN has dabbled into many things that they ought to not to dabble to. For now, I will advise the CBN governor to focus on monetary policies, you know, and especially when it comes to arresting the falling naira and what can be done immediately in order to do that. Because many things are hinged on that, because Nigeria, as of today, is still a net importer. You know, and if you are importing and your currency is the worst among the pack, you know, there is no way you will be competitive within your economy, and your people will be experiencing a significant inflation. The inflation Nigeria is experiencing today, according to MBS, is a food-led inflation. That means that because the price of food is increasing, the price of everything will increase. You know, if I have to buy my food 100 naira higher than the price, I will increase my service provision fee. The person supporting me too will increase his own fee. So it's a food-led inflation. So government has to find a way to ensure that, you know, if food is attacked in a way that everybody can afford food, at least, you know, everybody will be sane. And then you can then begin to attack the other aspect of the inflation.
Especially transport, definitely. That's another big one. Well, so much to unpack there. And definitely, I'm looking forward to a time where we see more demand, you know, for the naira and less. You know,
until we start producing.
Exactly.
And we can't start producing until government begins to subsidize all the factors of production. And that's the in any economy all over the world that is producing, the government is deliberate about subsidizing factors of production. Because if the factors of production is way high, your people cannot produce. So that's where, you know, where the policy of removal of subsidy and removal of devaluation of naira may have had significant impact on Nigeria, because the cost of energy blew. All the factors of production were just going abroad.
Right.
You know,
this government has a lot.
You know,
so much to do at this.
So there must be drastic efforts to subsidize.
And it has to start immediately at this point. Thank you so much, Emmanuel Onasami, lead partner, Cardinal Professional Services. Great having your perspective.
Thank you very much, Ladi, for having me.
Thank you. All right, after the break, we'll take a look at what to expect for investments in Africa as AFSIC kicks off in London. That's in a moment. Do stay with us.